The boardroom of Whitmore Towers gleamed under the sterile glow of recessed lighting.
Daddy!
Outside, Toronto's winter raged. Thick snowflakes hurled themselves against the 35th floor windows, dissolving into streaks of icy water. Inside, power hummed. Men in tailored suits shifted uneasily as financial projections for a billion-dollar real estate acquisition in Vancouver. Sprawled across a glass-walled dot at the head of the long mahogany table sat Alexander Whitmore, 43 years old, every inch the archetype of Canadian success. His hair, touched lightly with gray, was perfectly combed back, his jawline sharp, his gaze the sort that could cut through excuses and extract concessions worth millions. To the world, he was the man who had clawed his way from a middle-class childhood in Ottawa to become one of the most powerful real estate magnates in the country. Deals bent to his will. Entire skylines carried his signature. The meeting had dragged into its third hour when Alexander's phone, set on silent, buzzed insistently against the polished wood. A number he didn't recognize glowed on the screen. 5 minutes, gentlemen, Alexander said, his deep voice calm but commanding. Papers rustled as executives took the cue, some grateful for the pause, others too tense to breathe. He rose, slipping the phone into his hand, and walked toward the wall of windows. Toronto's skyline stretched beneath him, the CN Tower illuminated in icy blue, high-rises glittering like frozen monoliths. He swiped to answer, expecting perhaps a panic call from a Vancouver partner, maybe even a last-minute crisis from his legal team. Whitmore speaking, he said. Voice clipped, professional. For a moment, there was only static. Then, faintly, a trembling voice, Daddy. Alexander froze. The single word landed like a blow to his chest. He turned slightly, catching his own reflection in the window. A solitary man. A man who had never married. A man who had never once heard a child call him that sacred name. You must have the wrong number. He managed after a beat, his voice softer than he intended. Please don't hang up. The child's voice cracked, raw with desperation. Please, sir, don't. Alexander's hand tightened on the phone. Something inside him stirred, something older than ambition, older than empire. Who are you? He asked quietly. My name is Madison, the girl whispered. I'm almost 11. I have 2 little sisters, Zoe and Mia. Mommy gave me your number. She said if something really bad ever happened, if we were really scared and she couldn't help us, we should call this number and say that word. She said you'd understand. The boardroom faded. The billion-dollar deal vanished. Alexander pressed his forehead against the glass, staring blindly at the storm outside. What's wrong, Madison? He asked. There was a muffled sob, then a shuffle as if the phone was shifting between small hands. He heard faint crying in the background, the kind of quiet sobs children make when they're too hungry or too frightened to hold them back. Mommy collapsed this morning, Madison said, her voice trembling. She came home late from her cleaning job and she wouldn't wake up right. She just moans when I shake her. We don't have any food left, not even the bread from 2 days ago. I don't know what to do. Alexander closed his eyes, a wave of something he couldn't name surging in his chest. He forced his voice to stay steady. Where are you right now? Madison sniffled. We live above the old bakery on Hastings Street, the one with the boarded windows and the big crack in the wall where the rain comes in. Mommy always said it was temporary, but her words trailed off into silence. Hastings Street, East Vancouver. He knew the area rundown, forgotten, where families of immigrants and workers clung to survival in apartments. That should have been condemned years ago. Worlds away from the gleaming boardroom where he stood. Is your mother breathing? Alexander asked, pacing now, unable to stay still. Yes, Madison whispered. But she won't wake up. I don't know any doctors. I don't know anyone to call, she said. She said this number was only for emergencies. And this feels like an emergency. Alexander's heart pounded. None of it made sense. Why him? Why his number? Why would this child know to call him? What's your mother's name, Madison? Rachel Carter. But before she married my stepdad, her name was Rachel Bennett. The name struck him like lightning. Rachel Bennett, the woman with the warm brown eyes who had worked nights cleaning offices in his tower. 12 years ago. The woman who had laughed with him in quiet corridors. who had brewed cheap coffee that somehow tasted like salvation at 2 a.m., who had challenged him to dream bigger and believe he wasn't just his father's son, the woman he had once loved fiercely, secretly until she had vanished from his life without a trace. Alexander's voice cracked. "What does your mom look like, Madison? She has long brown hair, but it's not shiny anymore. She has the prettiest eyes, but they don't smile much these days. She's 37. She works nights cleaning offices downtown when she's not too sick. Mommy used to smile all the time, but now." Madison's voice faltered. Alexander's hand trembled. Rachel Bennett, now Rachel Carter. A past he had buried under contracts and towers of glass. A past that was suddenly alive, fragile, gasping for breath through the voice of a child calling him daddy. Behind him, the boardroom stirred. Executives were checking their watches, waiting for his return. The storm howled against the windows as if urging him to choose. He looked down at the phone, at the trembling voice clinging to him through the fragile line. And in that moment, Alexander Whitmore, the man who measured life in dollars and square footage, knew his empire meant nothing compared to what waited for him in a crumbling apartment above a shuttered bakery in East Vancouver. "Stay on the line, Madison," he said, his voice firm now, resolute. "I'm coming." The streets of Toronto blurred as Alexander's driver maneuvered the black SUV through slush and traffic. But halfway across the Don Valley Parkway, Alexander made a decision that startled even himself. "Stop the car," he ordered. His driver, a man who had worked for him nearly a decade, glanced back in shock. "Sir, with the weather, I'll drive myself," Alexander said, already reaching for the door handle. There was no time for arguments. The air outside sliced at him, cold and wet, as he climbed into the driver's seat. For years, he had controlled every variable, every risk. Tonight, control meant nothing. Somewhere in Vancouver, 3 children were huddled in a freezing apartment, waiting for a man they barely knew to keep a promise. As the highway unfurled before him, memories he had locked away for over a decade forced themselves into the silence. Rachel Bennett. She hadn't been like anyone else in his orbit. She wasn't part of the elite social circles of Bay Street or the old money families of Rosedale. She wasn't polished or connected. She was 25, working nights as a custodian in the tower he'd practically lived in as a young executive, trying to prove himself to his father. She'd had a laugh that echoed down marble hallways, warming even the coldest nights. She brewed terrible coffee but always offered him a cup. Somehow, between spreadsheets and sleepless deadlines, she had become the one person who saw him not the heir to Whitmore real estate, not the shark in a suit, but Alexander, a man still struggling to believe he belonged at the top. For 6 months, they had shared stolen moments, a conversation while she emptied trash bins, coffee at 3 a.m. in the break room, a walk in the snow outside the tower after her shift, when he offered her his scarf and she laughed, saying she'd grown up in Sudbury where winters were harsher than anything Toronto could conjure. Then, without a word, she was gone. Alexander had searched for her. He'd even hired a private investigator. But Rachel Bennett had vanished like a ghost. His father's security team told him it was better that way. That fraternization with staff created vulnerabilities. His father had been cold, clinical. "You're being groomed to lead an empire, Alexander. Don't throw it away for a cleaning girl." But Rachel had not just been a cleaning girl. She had been his anchor. And when she disappeared, he'd buried himself in ambition until nothing remained but towers of steel and glass. Now, 12 years later, her daughter had called him. Her daughter, who might be his. The highway stretched endlessly. Snow thickened, the night pressing down like a weight. Alexander gripped the wheel, his thoughts spiraling. What if Rachel hated him now? What if she had deliberately kept Madison and the twins from him? What if showing up only made things worse? But then he heard Madison's voice again in his memory, small and trembling. "Please don't hang up. Mommy collapsed. We don't have any food." Whatever answers waited in that apartment, there was no choice but to face them. It was nearly midnight by the time he reached Vancouver's east side. The SUV crawled down Hastings Street, potholes jarring his teeth, neon signs flickering over shuttered storefronts. Shadows clung to alleys, groups of the desperate and the homeless huddled around barrel fires. It was a different world from the penthouses Alexander had spent his life building. He parked across from a bakery whose sign had long since faded. Its windows were boarded, the wood rotting. Above, a single narrow window glowed faintly, light leaking through a thin sheet nailed where curtains should have been. Alexander's chest tightened. This was it. He carried a grocery bag he'd grabbed from a 24-hour store on the drive: milk, bread, fruit, enough to get the children through the night. It felt absurdly small against the enormity of what he was about to do. The stairwell smelled of mold and damp concrete. He climbed slowly, the bag cutting into his palm, his heart pounding harder with each step. At the third-floor landing, he found the door. Apartment 3B. He knocked softly. For a long moment, there was silence. Then came the sound of small feet, a whisper, the squeak of a chain lock. The door opened just a crack. A girl's face peeked out. Thin, pale, eyes wide and cautious. "Madison?" Alexander whispered. Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded quickly, pulling the door open wider. The apartment hit him like a blow. The walls were stained with water damage. A single lamp flickered weakly. The floor was bare except for a threadbare rug. But what struck him most wasn't the poverty. It was the order. Despite everything, the space was clean, carefully arranged. The faint scent of disinfectant masking the damp. Someone had fought to hold on to dignity here. On the couch lay Rachel. Her long brown hair spilled across a pillow, her face gaunt, her breathing shallow. She stirred at the sound of the door but didn't open her eyes. Alexander set the groceries down and moved closer, his hand trembling. "Rachel," he whispered. Her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, she opened her eyes. For a moment, confusion clouded them. Then recognition dawned, sharp as lightning. "Alexander?" Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Yes." His throat tightened. "It's me." She struggled to sit up, but Madison rushed forward. "Mommy, no, rest." Rachel's gaze darted between her daughter and Alexander. Disbelief, panic, and something unspoken flickered across her face. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I had to come," Alexander said. "Your daughter called me." Rachel closed her eyes, her hand trembling against the couch cushion. For 12 years, she had kept her silence. For 12 years, she had hidden a truth too dangerous to reveal. And now, here he was, standing in the wreckage of her life, face to face with everything she had tried to protect. In that cramped, failing apartment, the empire of Whitmore real estate felt very far away. There was only a man, a woman he had once loved, and the children who might carry his blood. The storm outside howled, rattling the window panes. Inside, the silence was heavier still. "Rachel," Alexander said softly, "we need to talk." Her lips parted as if to speak, but then she looked away, tears forming in her eyes. "Not in front of them," she whispered. Alexander turned. Madison stood stiff-backed, holding her sisters close. Her eyes locked on him with the fierce determination of a child forced to grow up too soon. "Daddy," she said quietly, testing the word again, as if afraid it would vanish if she didn't hold on to it. The sound cut through Alexander more deeply than any boardroom betrayal or financial loss ever had. He had come chasing a deal. Instead, he had found the one truth he could no longer ignore. Nothing in his life would ever be the same. For a long breath, no one moved. The apartment's thin walls clicked and settled in the cold like an old ship in winter seas. Somewhere below, a radiator coughed, then fell silent again. The steady wheeze of the storm pressed against the building, trying to get in. Alexander knelt by the couch. "Rachel," he said, and her name felt both foreign and familiar, like a place he'd left and never expected to see again. "Can you sit up?" Slowly. "I'm fine," she whispered, even as Madison slipped an arm behind her shoulders and lifted with the careful strength of a child who had done this too many times. The twins hovered, wide-eyed and solemn, clutching each other's sleeves. Alexander reached for the grocery bag and set a bottle of water and a banana on the rickety coffee table. "Small sips," he murmured, then a bite. "We'll go slow." Rachel's hands shook as she drank. Color returned faintly to her cheeks, and with it a guarded light in her eyes, the same light that had once laughed at his terrible midnight jokes in a marble hallway. She glanced at the girls, then back at him. "They shouldn't hear this." "It's all right," Madison said, chin lifting by a stubborn inch. "We're not babies," Alexander swallowed. "We'll talk in the kitchen," he said gently. "Madison, can you help your sisters? There's bread and soup packets in the bag." The girl nodded once, a commander receiving orders. "Zoe, Mia, come on. We're making dinner." Her voice was brisk, but the relief that flickered over her features when she saw food was a quiet heartbreak of its own. Alexander offered Rachel his arm. She hesitated, then took it, rising slowly. The kitchen was a galley carved from the wall, a stove that had seen too many winters, a small window filmed with damp. He eased her into a chair. From here, he could still see the girls at the couch, carefully arranging slices of bread like treasure, whispering conspiratorially about how much soup powder to use. He turned back to Rachel. "You vanished," he said, the words flat because anything more would shatter. 12 years ago. I looked for you." Her laugh was short and sharp, a sound with no warmth. "I know. How? Security," she said, and the single word carried a decade of fatigue. "The week after that night we watched the snow from the loading dock, and you told me. You'd signed your first solo deal. Your father's head of security took me aside. Not in an office, in the service corridor, where the cameras don't quite reach." Alexander felt something cold settle at the base of his ribs. "He had a folder," she went on. "Said there were concerns about inappropriate proximity, that protocols were being tightened. He reminded me cleaners are replaceable. Then he showed me a draft termination letter and said if I wanted to avoid complications, no references, no chance at another contract, rumors about theft, I should resign quietly. He said if I stopped coming in and stopped contacting you, my file would stay sealed. My God." Alexander leaned against the counter, the laminate warm under his palms from a stove that rarely worked. He could picture the man-square shoulders, faint cologne that smelled like power. His father's voice braided through memory. "You don't get to make sentimental mistakes, Alexander. Not if you expect to lead." "I was 25, Rachel said. "Rent due. Tuition I was trying to scrape together one class at a time. No cushion, no lawyer, no one to call. I thought if I pushed back, I'd be ruined." She looked past him to the window, where snow smeared the glass. "I planned to tell you anyway, I did. But then I missed a period." The room narrowed. Alexander heard only the clatter of a spoon at the couch and the quickened drum of his own heart. "Madison," he said. It wasn't a question. Rachel's mouth trembled. "I was going to call you even then. I swear it. But after the security man cornered me the second time, different tone. Same message. Worse threats." I looked at the stick with the 2 lines and I ran. "I found a basement room in Scarborough. I cleaned 3 buildings instead of 1. I told myself I'd stabilize, and then I'd find a way to reach you that wouldn't blow up your life. And mine." She shook her head. "Stability never came. One day I woke up and it was a year later. Then 2. He stepped closer without quite realizing it. "Why, when things got bad now, did Madison have my number?" Rachel folded her hands, as if bracing herself against an old storm. "Because I kept one thing from that time, a card. The private line you gave me after your first big closing. You said, if you ever need anything real, call this, not the office." I didn't call, but I kept it, tucked behind a photo in a frame. When we moved west after my husband got the factory job, I brought it. Her voice thinned. "When Daniel died, Vancouver got expensive fast. I told myself I'd only use the number if there were no other doors left. So I taught Madison, if you call and say Daddy, he'll pause long enough to listen." Something inside Alexander gave way, not broken, exactly, but changed shape forever. The boardrooms and the glass towers and the deals. They were all maps of a city that didn't include this handful of square feet, where 3 children learned to ration soup powder. He pulled out a chair and sat, elbows on his knees, gaze level with hers. "Rachel, I can help tonight. Food, a doctor. Tomorrow we'll figure the rest." She met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw the battle behind them, hope wrestling with the bone-deep habit of bracing for disappointment. "Help," she said carefully, "isn't custody. Help doesn't rewrite the past. I know, and help sometimes comes with a ledger," she added, a tired smile ghosting across her mouth. "A balance due later. Then take this as a gift," he said softly. "No ledger, No strings. From the living room, Madison called, trying to make her voice casual and failing. The soup needs more water. But the kettle doesn't work. Alexander stood. I've got it. He found a dented pot, ran the tap until it was less brown, set it on the one burner that still glowed faintly, while he waited for the slow curl of steam. He took stock like he would a distressed building. Leaks at the window frame, a gap under the door where snow crept to melt into a small gray puddle, a note taped to the fridge rent due first, no exceptions. He ladled soup into mismatched mugs. The twins cupped theirs like campfires. Madison took hers last, eyes flicking to the grocery bag, calculating how long it might stretch, because that is what eldest children do. Tomorrow, Alexander said, setting down his own untouched mug. I'm bringing a doctor up. Tonight you all sleep. I'll take the chair. Rachel opened her mouth to object, then closed it. A complicated gratitude moved over her face. Thank you. He shrugged off his coat and draped it over the back of the chair, then reached into his pocket for his phone. The part of his brain trained for emergencies clicked into place. Not for a merger, but for something that mattered. He texted 3 people: his house manager in Toronto, a physician he trusted in Vancouver, and his general counsel. Need assistance first thing. Family emergency. Quietly, Alexander, Rachel's voice had softened. Why are you really here? He looked at Madison, who was pretending not to listen as she blew on her soup. Then back at Rachel. Because she called, he said simply, and because I should have been here a long time ago. Silence settled, less heavy now, shaped by the small sounds of a home that had fought too long to be won. Spoons tapping, the hiss of the stubborn burner, the twins whispering about how the steam looked like breath in winter air. Rachel's hand rested on the table, fingers tracing a scratch in the laminate. They'll ask questions, she said finally. People with clipboards, people with power. About where we live, how we eat, who you are. They'll make judgments we can't control. Then we answer, Alexander said, and we prepare. And we make sure the next time anyone comes through that door, they find a family too solid to be knocked over by a form and a flashlight. The words surprised even him. They felt less like a promise and more like a pivot, a turn in a road that had looked straight for too long. Rachel studied him for a long moment. You talk like a man who can move buildings, she said. But this isn't concrete and steel. No, he said. It's harder. A tiny, reluctant smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. You always did like a difficult project. He exhaled, the first breath that didn't scrape, only the ones worth finishing. The twins finished their soup and started to fade, heads drooping against each other. Madison tucked a blanket around them, then stood guard, a small sentinel with a mug in her hands. Alexander unfolded the thin spare blanket from the back of the chair and gestured toward the bedroom. Go, he said. Sleep. I'll be here. Rachel hesitated, then touched his sleeve a brief. Anchoring contact. If you leave before morning, she murmured. Tell Madison yourself. Don't disappear like a ghost. I won't, he said, and meant it in a way that reached down to the bones. He took the night watch while the storm pressed its face to the glass, while a building full of strangers dreamed. In the dim, Alexander, Whitmore, who had charted towers into the sky, listened to 3 children breathe and to the fragile renewal of a life he had once left behind. Somewhere between the hour the burner finally cooled and the hour the snow softened to a whisper, he realized the truth. The empire could wait. Morning would ask hard questions. He was ready to answer them. The pale morning light crept through the cracks in the boarded window, soft and uncertain. It painted stripes across the sagging couch, the worn rug, the chipped coffee table that had seen better decades. Alexander had dozed in the chair, coat pulled tight, head tipped against the wall. But every creak of the building and every cough from the bedroom had kept him on alert. When he finally blinked awake, the sound that greeted him wasn't the groan of the storm or the shuffle of weary adults. It was laughter, thin, high, fragile laughter, but laughter nonetheless. He sat up, rubbing the stiffness from his neck. The twins were on the floor, barefoot, inventing a game with bottle caps and a cardboard box. Their giggles ricocheted off the peeling walls, a defiant reminder that even in ruin, children found a way to play. Madison hovered nearby, not playing, but watching like a hawk, as if joy were a luxury she had to ration for her sisters. She noticed Alexander stirring and straightened her small shoulders. "Morning," she said, with a gravity too old for her 11 years. "Morning," he echoed, his voice still rough. "Did you sleep?" She shrugged. "A bit. I wanted to make sure Mommy was okay." Rachel emerged then, leaning on the doorway. Her hair was tangled, her eyes shadowed. But she stood a little taller than the night before. She managed a faint smile. "They're resilient," she said softly, nodding toward the twins. Alexander's gaze returned to Madison. She clutched the hem of her oversized sweater, a hand-me-down too thin for Vancouver winters. He crouched so their eyes met. "You did well, calling me." Madison hesitated, her lips tightening. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Sometimes when you call numbers, people laugh, or they hang up, or they say you've got the wrong person." She swallowed hard. "I thought maybe you'd think I was a scam." The words tore at him. He reached out, careful, and rested a hand on her shoulder. "I almost did, but then I heard your voice, and I couldn't ignore it." Her eyes glistened. "Mommy said you were important. That if things got bad enough, you'd come." Rachel's expression tightened in the doorway. A mix of shame and fierce protectiveness. She wanted to speak, but Madison barreled on, the dam of her silence breaking. "Last winter," Madison whispered, "we didn't have heat for a week. Mommy tried to boil water on the stove to make the rooms warm, but the gas shut off too. We wore all our clothes at once. We huddled in the bed together, and Mommy cried when she thought we were asleep. Zoe asked if we were going to freeze. Mommy told us no, because she said she had a plan." Alexander's chest constricted. "What plan?" Madison's small shoulders lifted, then fell. "She taught us how to go to the restaurants on Main Street after they closed. We asked if they had leftover food. She said it wasn't begging, it was just asking for help, because sometimes people threw out good food. The first time, Zoe was so scared she couldn't speak. So I did it. We ate fries that night. Cold fries, but they were better than nothing." The twins looked up at her now, as if remembering, and nodded solemnly. Alexander had closed billion-dollar deals. He had stared down hardened bankers across mahogany tables. But nothing had ever cut him as cleanly as the matter-of-fact tone of a child describing survival. He turned to Rachel. She looked away, her jaw tight, shame written in every line of her face. "You shouldn't have had to do that," Alexander said to Madison, his voice steady but raw. Madison's reply was quick, almost defensive. "But we had to. Mommy said strong families don't break, even when things get bad. So we did what we had to." The silence that followed was broken only by the clatter of a bottle cap rolling under the couch. Then Zoe, the bolder of the twins, piped up. "Are you going to marry Mommy?" Rachel's head jerked up. Zoe, the little girl, blinked, unbothered. "On TV, when daddies come back, they marry the mommies. Then everyone lives in a big house and has pancakes every morning." Mia giggled, nodding furiously. "I want pancakes." Alexander's throat closed. He looked at Rachel, who had gone pale, and then back at the expectant faces turned up to him. He forced a careful smile. "Life isn't always like TV shows. Sometimes it's more complicated." Madison's eyes narrowed, sharp and old beyond her years. "But you still love her, right?" The question dropped like a stone. Rachel's lips parted, but no words came. Her hands twisted together, betraying nerves she couldn't hide. Alexander's heart thudded. "Do I?" The answer was immediate, undeniable. He had never stopped. Not through the skyscrapers, not through the years of boardrooms, not even when he convinced himself she had chosen to leave him. But saying it aloud here, in front of 3 children, who might carry his blood, it felt like walking a wire stretched across. "A Kenyan. I came," he said finally, his voice low, rough, "because when your mom needed me, I couldn't stay away. That has to mean something." The twins exchanged a glance and beamed, satisfied. Madison didn't smile, but for the first time since he walked through that door, her gaze softened. Just a fraction. Rachel broke the tension with a shaky laugh, brushing hair from her face. "All right, enough questions. Let the man breathe." Zoe wrinkled her nose, but he didn't answer about pancakes. Mia clapped, her hands, pancakes, against his will. Alexander chuckled, the sound foreign in his own ears. Pancakes it is. Tonight, I'll take you all somewhere with the biggest stack you've ever seen." The twins squealed. Madison watched him, cautious hope flickering like a candle in the wind. And Alexander thought, if I can keep that hope alive, maybe I can earn the word she gave me last night, Daddy. By the time Alexander guided them through Pearson International Airport, the children's eyes were wide as saucers. They had never flown before, never stepped onto a jet that roared into the night sky and carved a path across the Rockies. Madison had gripped the armrest with white knuckles through takeoff, whispering instructions to Zoe and Mia as if she'd been trained for turbulence all her life. But when the lights of Toronto glittered beneath the wings, even she fell silent, her mouth parting in awe. Now, as the black SUV pulled up in front of a gleaming tower on Bay Street, the twins pressed their faces to the windows, gasping at the glass walls climbing endlessly into the sky. Madison sat stiffly between them, her posture defensive, like she expected to be told they didn't belong. The doorman in a sharp navy coat hurried to open the door. His eyes flicked over the group. Alexander in his tailored suit, followed by a tired woman in thrift store clothes and 3 children with patched backpacks. The brief hesitation, the faint tightening of his jaw, was subtle but unmistakable. Rachel caught it. Her chin dipped, her hands clenched tighter around the strap of her worn purse. Alexander noticed too. He offered the man a cool look, a reminder of who signed the checks here, and the hesitation vanished behind a professional smile. But the damage was done. Inside, the lobby glittered with marble and chandeliers. The girls craned their necks at the ceiling, their footsteps echoing against polished stone. Madison, though, kept her gaze on the floor, as if she could make herself invisible among the suits and heels sweeping past. The elevator doors opened silently. They stepped inside, mirrored walls reflecting 6 versions of their uneasy little group. The twins giggled at their multiplied faces, pressing tiny palms against the glass. Madison stood ramrod straight, arms crossed. When the elevator slid open directly into the penthouse foyer, the twins gasped in unison. "Is this your house?" Zoe whispered, her voice reverent. The space stretched out like a palace in the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the CN Tower glowing against the night. A sweeping staircase spiraled to a second floor. Crystal light fixtures spilled warmth across white marble floors, and beyond the kitchen island gleamed a refrigerator larger than their entire Vancouver bathroom. Rachel froze just inside the door, her shoes squeaking faintly on the marble. She looked small, uncertain, out of place among the curated perfection of Alexander's world. "Welcome home," Alexander said softly. Mia darted forward, her shoes squeaking. "It's so shiny," she squealed, spinning in circles. Zoe ran after her, their laughter filling the penthouse. Madison didn't move. She stood near the door, shoulders stiff, her eyes scanning the space like she was searching for traps. "This isn't our home," she said quietly. Alexander's chest tightened. He crouched until he was at her level. "You're right. It's mine. But as long as you're here, it's yours too. No strings, no tricks." Her jaw worked, but she said nothing. Rachel finally stepped deeper inside, her gaze sweeping the room with disbelief. "This is..." She stopped, words failing. "Alexander, this is another planet. It's just a place," he said. "For walls or roof. Don't..." She cut him off, her voice sharp. "Don't pretend this is ordinary. You built towers like this to keep people like us out." He winced, because she wasn't wrong. A buzz sounded from the panel near the door. Alexander frowned, crossing to check it. A message flashed. "Concierge desk. Call from management." He pressed the button. A clipped voice answered. "Mr. Whitmore, there's been an inquiry regarding your guests. The Residents Association had concerns. Shall we proceed with registration?" Rachel stiffened. Madison's eyes snapped up, wary. The twins, mercifully, were too busy running up the staircase. Alexander's voice was like ice. "Register them under my household. Permanently." A pause. "Of course, sir." The line clicked off. He turned back to Rachel. "This is why you didn't want to come, isn't it? Because you knew the looks, the whispers." Her laugh was brittle. "I've seen enough lobbies to know where we're welcome and where we're not." Madison finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll say we don't belong here." Alexander crouched again. meeting her defiant gaze. Then let them talk. The only people who get to decide where you belong are standing in this room. Her lip trembled, but she nodded once, fiercely. The rest of the night was chaos the good kind. The girls discovered the pantry, squealing at shelves full of cereal and cookies. Rachel hovered at the edge of the kitchen, overwhelmed. Alexander poured bowls of food, the clatter of spoons filling the silence where doubt usually lived. When bedtime came, Zoe and Mia argued over which bedroom to take, eventually collapsing into one king-sized bed together, swallowed whole by pillows. Madison lingered in the doorway, reluctant. Alexander stepped up behind her. "You can pick any room you like." Her voice was quiet. "I'll stay with them. They still get scared at night." He nodded, respect threading through his chest. Rachel appeared in the hall, wearing one of the robes he'd left out for her. It dwarfed her frame, but there was dignity in the way she held herself. "I don't know how long we can stay here," she said softly, "but thank you for tonight." Alexander studied her face, the lines carved by years of exhaustion, the eyes that still carried the same fire from a decade ago. "You're not going back to Hastings Street," he said firmly. "Not ever." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Her gaze softened, but fear lingered beneath it. "This isn't just about shelter, Alexander. People will ask questions. People with power. They'll judge us." He didn't flinch. "Then let them. Tomorrow, we'll start answering." Rachel exhaled, long and shaky. "You sound like a man about to go to war." His jaw tightened. "I am." The morning Toronto turned its gaze on them. It did so through headlines. A cluster of alerts drummed onto Alexander's phone before sunrise, push notifications. Emails from PR. A text from his head of communications with 5 words that landed like a gavel. "You're above the fold today." He opened the first link and felt the familiar chill of a crisis crawl up his spine. Bay Street Titan brings East Van family into penthouse. Whitmore's secret family? Questions swirl around power CEO. Class divide in the clouds. Who belongs on Bay Street? Beneath the stark fonts, a photograph taken with a long lens, the penthouse doors opening the night before. The twins sprinting to the elevator, Madison's guarded profile. Rachel turned slightly away as if warding off a gust of wind that had followed them up from Hastings Street. Alexander stood behind them, a figure cut from a different world. The caption did the rest. He locked the screen. In the hallway, the apartment was waking up, piano keys being pressed carefully by Zoe. The sounds of drawers opening as Madison assessed where the spoons lived. Rachel's soft warning about glassware that cost more than a month's rent on their old place. The domesticity steadied him and sharpened his focus. He brewed coffee and called his general counsel. "Margaret, we move now." Margaret's voice was all business. "I've already pulled the file," she said. "We have a problem, but it's navigable." "Madison, legally adopted by Daniel Carter 8 years ago," Margaret said. "His name is on the birth certificate. That gives his estate parental precedence over any biological claim we may establish now." "And the twins?" "Rachel is sole guardian. You have no standing yet." He paced to the window, the CN Tower a clean blade against the pale sky. "Next steps. To tracks," she said. 1. File a petition to establish biological paternity for Madison. That opens the door to seeking parental rights, or at least a shared guardianship arrangement, assuming Rachel consents. 2. Put formal support structures in place: education, healthcare, housing, so that any agency sniffing around sees stability, not chaos. He exhaled. "Any agency is already sniffing." "You're correct. A beat. CPS will knock. Press attention triggers welfare checks. We prepare." He ended the call and turned back to the kitchen. Madison was lining up bowls with the precision of a quartermaster. She glanced at him, then at the phone in his hand. "Is it bad?" she asked, voice level. "It's noise," he said. "We'll handle it." She held his gaze a second longer than most adults could. Then she nodded once, as if approving the plan. By 9, the first wave hit. Boardroom. The emergency meeting invite arrived with the same sterile efficiency as a lunch reminder. The subject line was not a question. Governance concerns, immediate discussion. In the mirrored elevator, Alexander caught his reflection eye straight, eyes clear, jaw set. The doors opened onto a table of polished wood and polished men and women who suddenly found their coffee fascinating. The chair, a man who prized consensus the way surgeons prize sterility, cleared his throat. Alexander, we're concerned about optics. The Vancouver acquisition requires delicate handling. Your personal situation is becoming a distraction. Families are not distractions, Alexander said. Their context. A ripple of discomfort traveled down the line. Victoria Sterling, a board member who treated the markets like a chessboard and people like pawns, steepled her fingers. Context, she repeated, tasting the word like a foreign spice. Investors are asking whether you've exercised sound judgment. They worry about entanglements. He met her eyes evenly. Investors ask many things. I answer the ones that matter. And what matters here? Sterling asked. That 3 children are fed, safe, and going to school, he said. That the company we build reflects a city we actually live in, not a glass echo chamber. Sterling's smile was small. Your rhetoric is stirring, but markets prefer predictability. He leaned forward. Predictability is a building with good bones and a place for people to stand. If you're asking whether I'll miss meetings, no. If you're asking whether the Vancouver deal is sound, yes. If you're asking whether I'll ask those children to wait while we close, no. Silence. Then the chair tried the door marked compromise. We can form a special committee to assist you during this transition. No, Alexander said. We proceed as planned. And the next time a resident association or reporter calls about who is permitted in my home, refer them to me. Sterling's eyes glittered. That may not be sufficient. It will be, he said, and stood. I have another meeting, penthouse. When he returned, 2 women with clipboards sat at the kitchen island. One wore the calm neutrality of social work. The other had the focused patience of a family physician who had seen too much and still believed in triage. Mr. Whitmore, the social worker said, rising. Sarah Walsh, Children's Services. This is Dr. Patel. Rachel stiffened in the doorway. Madison slipped closer to the twins. Alexander extended a hand. Thank you for coming. Sarah's eyes flicked over the space beds made, dishes drying. A timetable Margaret's team had hurriedly printed on the fridge. School enrollment appointment, pediatric checkups, counseling consult. We had a report, she said gently. We're here to make sure everyone's safe. Ask what you need. He said. They did. They asked about food, about routines, about medical history, about school attendance in Vancouver, about the night Rachel collapsed and what had changed since. They spoke to the twins separately, to Madison alone at the piano bench, to Rachel at the dining table where she twisted a napkin into a soft rope dot at one point. Sarah looked up from her notes. Madison, how do you feel about living here? Madison glanced at Alexander, then away. Like we're visiting a museum, she said. But with cereal, does it feel safe? Yes, she said. Then, after a heartbeat, as long as he keeps answering when we call. Dr. Patel's pen stilled. The room seemed to exhale. When the interviews ended, Sarah closed her folder. We'll file a preliminary report, she said. Given the attention, there will be follow-up. For now, she glanced at the fridge, at the appointment grid mapped like new scaffolding. For now, you're doing what we ask families to do, create stability. After they left, Rachel sank into a chair. I hate clipboards, I know, Alexander said. You can't fix everything with a signature. She murmured, not this. He looked at the girls marching cereal boxes back to the pantry with the solemnity of a parade. I can fix what's mine to fix. The rest we will carry. Media. At noon, a news van idled illegally on the curb. A reporter with bright lipstick and a parka practiced a live stand-up. Penthouse spire over her shoulder. Alexander's PR team texted a statement. He approved it with one edit. He added names. Mr. Whitmore confirms that Rachel Carter and her daughters, Madison, Zoe, and Mia, are his household guests. He asks for privacy as the family adjusts and as guardianship matters are responsibly addressed. He remains fully engaged as CEO. He is grateful for the support shown by many and reminds the public that children are not spectacles. He watched the segment with the volume low. They cut the last sentence. He wasn't surprised. Legal. Margaret arrived with folders and the dry energy of a person who thrives in labyrinths. "We'll file paternity this afternoon," she said. "Rachel, with your consent." She slid a form across the table. Rachel read it twice. "What if this makes everything worse?" "It may," Margaret said, without flinching. "It may also be the only way to make anything better." Rachel looked to Madison, who had been listening without pretending not to. Madison nodded almost imperceptibly. Rachel picked up the pen. Before the ink dried, the intercom buzzed. "Concierge again. Mr. Whitmore, Ms. Sterling is here to see you." Rachel's head snapped up. "Who?" Board member Alexander said, jaw tightening. "Send her up." Sterling entered with the smile of a person who brought storms and expected to be thanked for the weather. She took in the room, the girls, the paperwork, the woman in a robe that didn't quite fit, and turned to Alexander as if the rest were furniture. "We could have done this quietly," she said. "You chose spectacle. What do you want, Victoria?" "Stability," she said. "For the company. That requires you to choose where you live, in the boardroom or in this." A flick of her hand took in the sight of Mia carefully taping a drawing to the fridge. "I choose both," he said. "Then I choose leverage." She slipped a document from her bag. "A motion to form an oversight committee with temporary authority over the Vancouver acquisition. Effective immediately. You don't have the votes." Her smile didn't waver. "I have momentum. The market likes adults in the room." He stepped closer. "Be very careful, Victoria, or what?" she asked softly. "You'll threaten me with righteous fatherhood?" "The street eats sentiment for breakfast, not a threat," he said. "A prediction. If you weaponize these children, it will backfire." She moved toward the door, pausing beside Madison. "Museums are for artifacts," she said lightly. "Try not to break anything while you play house." Madison lifted her chin. "We don't break," she said. "We fix." Sterling's smile thinned. She left. The door clicked shut. The quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was the held breath before a storm breaks. Margaret slid another folder toward Alexander. "One more thing," she said. "A letter from Children's Services. There's been an anonymous complaint citing unconventional living arrangements and concerns about the children's welfare. The timing is notable." "Sterling," Rachel whispered, fury and fear twining. "Maybe," Margaret said. "Maybe not. We don't speculate, we prepare." She tapped the folder. "There will be a hearing. We'll need letters from teachers in Vancouver, from your staff, from the physician. We'll need to demonstrate that this is not a rescue impulse, but a sustainable plan." Alexander nodded slowly, feeling the path under his feet tilt and become something steeper, truer. "Then we build it," he said. Piece by piece. He turned to the girls. "Madison, will you show me your schoolwork?" "Zoe, Mia, I need your best drawing of our kitchen. Label everything." "Why?" Mia asked, delighted to be recruited. "Because," he said, "someone is going to ask whether this is a home, and we're going to show them." Rachel watched him, something new moving behind her eyes. "You really think we can win?" "I think we can belong," he said. "And that's harder to knock down than a headline." Outside, the day dimmed toward evening, the city's lights flickering on like constellations you could touch. Inside, the fridge filled with crayoned label stove, table, family, and a timetable of appointments became a scaffolding for a life. The intercom buzzed one last time. Sarah Walsh's calm voice came through. "Mr. Whitmore, we've scheduled the preliminary hearing. Monday at 10. "Thank you," he said. He hung up and looked at Rachel, at Madison, at the twins carefully sticking labels straight. The board would fight. The media would feed. The law would measure them with a ruler never built for families like theirs. He smiled, slow and certain. "Then Monday," he said, "we show them what a home looks like." And for the first time since the photo at the penthouse doors, it felt like they might. The Monday morning sky over Toronto was the color of steel, heavy with a storm that hadn't yet broken. Inside the courthouse, fluorescent lights hummed, indifferent to the tension that had settled into every breath. Alexander adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket. It was armor more than clothing, but he felt the weight of something far greater than fabric pressing on his shoulders. Rachel sat beside him, her hands clenched together in her lap. The girls had been taken to a waiting room with toys and juice boxes. But Madison had caught his sleeve before leaving. "Don't let them decide we don't belong," she whispered fiercely. He'd cupped her cheek. "They don't get to decide that. We do." Now, as the clerk called their case, Alexander rose. He had spoken to shareholders, to governments, to journalists wielding questions like knives, but never had his throat been so tight. The judge looked over half-moon glasses. "We are here to review the living arrangements of minors Madison, Zoe, and Mia Carter, and to determine whether their welfare is compromised or enhanced by their current circumstances." The Crown representative rose first, citing the complaint. "Your Honor, we have concerns regarding unconventional cohabitation. Mr. Whitmore is not the legal guardian of any of the children. He is a man of significant means, yes, but wealth alone does not equate to stability. We ask the court to consider whether this situation is more spectacle than structure." Rachel's face flamed, but Alexander squeezed her hand under the table. When it was their turn, Margaret rose. Her voice was calm, steady. "These children were found in a state of neglect, not due to any lack of love from their mother, but due to poverty and circumstance. Since entering Mr. Whitmore's household, they have been enrolled in school, scheduled for medical evaluations, and provided consistent meals and shelter. We have letters from teachers in Vancouver attesting to Madison's resilience, from neighbors affirming Rachel's devotion, from physicians confirming the children's health is now stabilizing. This is not spectacle. This is survival finally given a chance to breathe." The judge leafed through the file. "And the paternity petition?" Margaret nodded. "Filed. Madison's biological link to Mr. Whitmore is probable, though legal adoption by her late stepfather complicates matters. Regardless, what we present today is not a claim of ownership, but of responsibility." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Whitmore, you are aware that this commitment may compromise your professional standing?" Alexander stood, his voice steady but full. "Your Honor, I've spent my life building towers, but a tower without people is just empty glass. If being a father costs me boardrooms, so be it. These girls are not a distraction. They are the only thing that has made my life feel like more than numbers on a ledger." Silence stretched. Then from the back of the courtroom, a small sound of chair scraping. Madison had slipped in, her stubborn chin lifted. Before anyone could stop her, she marched to the front. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "We don't need a fancy house. We just need to not be hungry. We need someone who won't leave when it's hard. He came, he stayed. That's all." The judge blinked, startled. Sarah Walsh, the social worker, stood quickly, ready to usher Madison out. But something in the room had shifted. Even the Crown representative looked away, throat working. The judge tapped a pen against the bench. "Children have a way of cutting through rhetoric. Very well. Temporary guardianship is granted to Mr. Whitmore pending further review. Conditions: continued school attendance, monthly welfare checks, and full transparency of financial arrangements." Rachel exhaled so hard she nearly crumpled. Alexander reached for her hand, and for once, she didn't pull away. The headlines the next day were merciless, but different in tone. Bay Street CEO chooses family over fortune. Court grants guardianship to Whitmore in unlikely case. A new kind of wealth, love in the penthouse. Investors muttered. Sterling fumed. But for once, the noise seemed far away. At home, the girls filled the penthouse with Sound Mia's piano scales, Zoe's chatter about her new school friend, Madison's careful homework notes spread across the dining table. Rachel cooked for the first time in a kitchen that could have graced a magazine, and though she moved awkwardly among gleaming appliances, the smell of soup made the place feel less like a showroom and more like a home. Later that week, as twilight painted the city in gold, Alexander stood on the balcony. The skyline he had once measured in profits now shimmered like something entirely new. A backdrop to laughter drifting through sliding doors. Rachel joined him, wrapping her cardigan tighter. "You've turned your life upside down," she said softly, "or maybe right side up." He replied, "Inside." Madison leaned against the glass, watching him. "Daddy," she called, testing the word once more. He turned, smiling. "Yes, are we going to be okay?" He crossed back inside, scooping her into his arms. Zoe and Mia tumbled onto his legs, giggling. Rachel shook her head, but there was warmth in her eyes, "We're going to be better than okay," Alexander said. "We're going to be us." That night, when the girls finally drifted to sleep, Alexander walked quietly through the penthouse. Crayon labels still clung to the fridge, stove, table, family. He touched the last one. And for the first time in his life, the word felt complete.